Welcome to my thoughts on Final Fantasy 16. Hopefully I can get it through this time without messing up my train of thought, because it's happened like 10 times already. And initially was trying to do this live like I usually do, but we had a nice ad break right in the middle of it. So here we go. We're doing it off the old dome. Forward warning, there will be spoilers in this video, so if you haven't played it yet, I highly recommend going and finishing the game and then coming back to the video. If you don't care about spoilers, or you have no intention on playing the game anyway, well, thank you for being here, and let's go over my thoughts on Final Fantasy 16. Now, there's a few points I want to cover. The first and most important one is this a Final Fantasy game? Yes, 1,000 times yes. Any real Final Fantasy fan would see that. There's a few diehards out there that saw that it's not turn-based combat or action ATB combat or any of the variants of that. It's just a straight up DMC clone type combat, which is fine. But they saw that and they're like, oh, this isn't a Final Fantasy game. That's what they did. They crossed their arms and said, I'm not playing it. It's a bad game. Well, they're wrong. That being said, there are some things that I have to critique about it, and part of those critiques do revolve around the combat. But let me get into that in a moment. Is this a Final Fantasy? Yes, absolutely. There's so many callbacks to the entire series, from Bart's to the Invincible to Sephiroth, and every game in between. There's just a ton of callouts, although some of them are very minuscule, some of them are very obvious. Final boss, I'm looking at you. But there's a ton of love in this game, especially if you've played the Final Fantasy series, a few of them, the main popular ones, or the entire series. You will find a lot of callbacks, a lot of Easter eggs, a lot of wink wink nudge nudge at older games, and I live for that kind of a thing. That is one of my favorite things in gaming as a whole, is when you're playing a series and the newer titles pay homage to the older ones. It's just something that really gets me. That being said, the combat though is definitely not like older titles. They definitely changed it up, but I think once it gets refined, it might be for the better. As it stands right now, I feel like they kind of missed the bar a little bit, and personally I ended up preferring turn-based combat over what we got with this. That's not to say that the combat system in this is bad, but let's talk about it. So initially they got the designer for the combat from Devil May Cry to come in and do the combat for this game, and while I believe he did a stellar job, I feel like there's a few core elements that they could have incorporated that would have really gone over a lot better. In the game, if you play the first couple hours, you'll already know that they give you a companion, Torgal. The best dog in video games, in my opinion. He is so damn awesome. Love Torgal. And he also has some pretty awesome moments throughout the story as well. He's a lot more than just a faithful hound. He's family. And once you acquire him in the story, you actually gain control over him in combat. Admittedly, it falls down to 3 basic commands. However, if you use your noggin a little bit, those commands can be worked into combos, and you can actually utilize him quite effectively, especially at higher levels of play and higher difficulties after the game is beaten, unfortunately. You can actually utilize him really well. And I feel like it was a bit of an oversight that they didn't incorporate that exact feature for the rest of the companions that you get along the way in the story. There's at least 5 or 6 different people that can join your party at any given point. I understand the frequency of them leaving and joining, and you being left alone with Torgal might affect their decision on this. However, I still think it would have been a really nice addition to the combat to just give, even if it was the same 3 basic commands, to the other party members as well, being able to switch between them or something like that. If anything, a good upgrade to this combat system would be similar to what they did in Final Fantasy 15, where you can activate abilities from people in your party and kind of engage in that way. Overall though, I felt that at least on the starting difficulty, it was really easy, and that was a bit of a letdown. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it did kind of bum me out a little bit. I like a bit of a challenge in games. It was nice feeling super overpowered for once, but again, it would have been nicer to have a bit of more control, at least, over the difficulty going into it. I didn't use any of the assist items or anything like that. I was underleveled for most of the game, and then I'd say like the last third, I was quite overleveled. So that definitely made it a lot easier, and that was my own doing. However, being at around the level that the game expected you to be at, I don't think would have provided all that much of a difference in terms of difficulty. I really, really want to hammer home that I feel like the omission of being able to control party members the way you control Torgal is a huge blow to the overall score for me personally, and probably a lot of other longtime Final Fantasy fans as well. Because when it came down to it, we're very used to playing with an entire party of people, having our whole gang with us, equipping them with all this gear that we want them to have, and in this, you can't even do so much as change their costumes. Admittedly, I understand why, but that's kind of a bummer. But the combat itself truly never got all that old. I did find myself, especially in the early parts of the game, fighting everything I came across. I liked a lot of the combos that you could utilize, and I also there's an argument and narrative online that you can beat the entire game just by pressing square or whatever your attack button decides to be. And while that's true, you're not really doing yourself any favors. You're making it a lot more difficult on yourself than it needs to be. And on top of that, a lot less fun because there's a lot of abilities and a lot of like iconic powers mixed with just general combos like charging your sword, doing a downward thrust, jumping off of the enemies, these kinds of things that can all really flesh out the combat experience and make it a lot more intricate and a lot more flashy, a lot more fun. There are some people that are just saying, why would I do that if all I have to do is press square? It's like, well, you're playing a video game to have fun. So experiment with the tools they're giving you to have that fun. If all you want to do is just press square and get through it, well, I mean, why are you complaining about the game in the first place? You're just trying to play the story. So you shouldn't really be commenting on how simplified the combat is for you because that's your own doing. There's a lot of depth to the combat and you can utilize that. Yeah, you might be able to just press the one attack button, but you're going to take a lot longer to kill whatever you're fighting. Use combos, use abilities, iconic powers, all these things, and you will get through it a lot quicker and a lot more fun. Personally, that's the whole reason I play the games, is because I find them to be fun. And I like to, in general, when a game gives me tools to play it, I like to experiment and try different things. I'm a big RPG fan, Skyrim, Elder Scrolls type stuff, and I have played games like that repeatedly because I like to try out the different builds. I play a game one way, and then I'm like, you know what, maybe I'll be a caster this next time, or maybe I'll be a stealth archer, the most overpowered thing in all of Elder Scrolls. The classics. But that's enough about combat. Let's get into the other thing that I have a huge critique on, and that's the side quests. For me, this is probably the biggest blow to what would have otherwise made this game a perfect Final Fantasy and a perfect 10 out of 10. And that really came down to the monotony and simplicity of the side quests as a whole. Rarely did they ever boil down to more than go here, kill that, go here, grab that. That's really all it was. But as simple and as tedious as it was to go through and do all of them, the storytelling and the world building that the side quests provided was oftentimes more intriguing and a lot more entertaining than the story that the main storyline was telling you. There's multiple instances of the side quests being so fulfilling in the story aspect alone and the lore and the understanding the characters that you're surrounded by, that I'm just like, this should have been part of the main quest. Maybe not doing this specific task, but having these conversations could have been worked into the main story and would have felt a lot better. There's a really dumb article by Kotaku, huge surprise. Yeah, I throw shade because I don't care. They're a terrible video game, if you can even call them that, video game journalist. All they like to do is push propaganda and get people to argue instead of actually talk about if a game is good or fun or not. And they had a really shitty article dissing the character Jill in this game, saying she's what's wrong with or modern females in gaming. No, you're wrong. Although, admittedly, you'd have to find out mostly about her through side quests. There is plenty of character development for her in the main storyline. However, the most important parts, and arguably the best parts, come from doing the side content. One of my favorite moments in the games just happened here at the very end, and happened to do with the side quests involving her that otherwise you could have skipped. And honestly, at this point in the game, for me, the fatigue was setting in strong with doing all these side quests. I'm more of a completionist, and I just wanted to get all the way, so that's why I did them all. But there's a lot of people that probably quit halfway through, or hell, right at the beginning, and didn't bother with any of the side quests, and they're not going to get this kind of content with the game without doing those side quests. Yes, it boiled down to go here, kill that. Go here, grab that. But I got some really awesome moments, especially between Clive and Jill, that admittedly made especially the very end of the main story all that more impactful for me personally. Now, where they got this narrative that she's what's wrong with modern women in gaming, I don't fucking know. That must be the biggest, just like, I'm gonna shit on a keyboard and turn that into an article fucking move that they've ever done. But Jill was probably one of my favorite females in gaming because not only was she powerful, but she came through and was there for an emotional support as well as physical support. Not, physical, but, well, I don't know, there was a part. But she was there as a combat party member who personally, out of all of them, was probably my favorite. I love the animations that she had in combat. And for me, it just seemed like her AI was almost on point, like 90% of the time, compared to a lot of the other people that were in the party with me. And doing all these side quests, you really got to learn like how strong her relationship is with Clive and how much they truly did love each other. And again, just some of the most beautiful moments in this game are between Jill and Clive, and it made her one of my favorite characters. To be fair, I have a lot of favorite characters. They made me like a lot of the people in this game. Again, side quests really help with that, but ultimately that doesn't take away from the fact that I did truly love and appreciate a lot of the characters. Gav, Sid, Uncle Byron, a lot of these characters just all kind of came together for me. Hell, even Blackthorn really grew on me. Blackthorn and Karen, gangsters, loved them. Their side quests boiled down to tedium. Go here, kill that. Go here, grab that. But the stories their side quests told were some of my favorites in the game. I really liked learning about how much of a fucking thug Karen was in her past and is still. And I really like seeing Blackthorn, the typical rough and tough blacksmith who doesn't give a fuck about anything. He's got a mouth like a sailor. Kind of come to terms with like emotions and caring for people and getting over himself, as well as, a lot of the hurdles that he put in front of himself, which you could say also just boils down to getting over himself. There's a lot of good things that came out of the side quests, but to get to them, you had to deal with a lot of bad things. So for me, it's like a 60-40 split. Like 60%, it was so bad. I just didn't really enjoy it. 40% I loved it, especially towards like the last third of the game. Anytime I saw a side quest pop up, I was like, oh fuck, here we go. This is gonna take like another 30-40 minutes, and it's really gonna boil down to 10 minutes of actual gameplay and me just sitting there listening to stories, which where I loved all the stories for the most part, like 90% of them, it just didn't need to happen. They could have worked it in a lot more organic of a way. Maybe had like a optional conversation choice come up with the characters when you can talk to them, stuff like that. But that being said, sticking with the side quests topic, there was a hunt board, which that I actually really liked. It was very simplistic. When a hunt appears on the thing, you get a mini and then I think one case, like a super boss, a couple of cases, some of them were kind of tough, mini slash alternate bosses, optional bosses that you could go out into the world and then fight. And some of those fights were probably the best in the whole game, next to the centerpiece boss fights in the main story. Nothing will ever touch those. They define what I think a good boss fight should be in modern day gaming. But we'll get to that in a moment. These hunt quests, they were just a lot of fun. It was enjoyable to go. Even like when I was over leveled, some of them were still quite challenging. And some of my favorite fights in the game, next to the kaiju fights, which those were awesome. But yeah, so with those, they were a good addition. It's just they were kind of lackluster and there was little to no storytelling involving them, minus like the little blurbs on the hunt posts themselves, which did kind of flesh out the world a little bit more, but they were just a few sentences and not anything super detailed. And ultimately that boiled down to, you read this, you go here, kill that. Again, pretty simplistic, not the worst thing in the world, but it just kind of fell short for me. All that being said, I did really enjoy the hunt board and all those optional fights. I'm glad they put that in there. And shout out to the Moogle. He was awesome. Let's move on next to the world map. Not the world in terms of like lore, but the world in terms of graphics, physical, boots on the ground, running around, checking it out. Now, for the most part, I really, really liked it. I thought it was probably one of the better world designs they've done in a Final Fantasy game. A lot of the character designs, the buildings, the towns, all of them were really, really well done, I thought. Towards like the big boss fights that came every once in a while, you would have this like weird gauntlet style dungeon type thing to go through, and you'd never get a map for these things, which was weird, especially since almost all of them took place in a main city of sorts, so you'd expect them to have a map of that, but alas they don't. And it kind of just go through here, excuse me, attack these guys, open this gate, go through, attack those guys, open that gate, go through, kill some more guys, open another door, boss fight, that kind of a thing. And whereas it was fun, it was kind of repetitive, especially towards the end when I started seeing it happen again. I was just like, oh my god, here we go. How many doors am I gonna have to go through? But that aside, again, the world design was really cool. The towns, everything looked genuinely lived in. There's NPCs talking amongst themselves, going from point A to point B. There's a lot of good stuff going on. You felt like it was actually alive. Minus the in-between parts when you were going, through the wide open areas where there wasn't any people from town to town. There was, as much as you wanted to explore, there was little reason to do so. The chests, the loot was terrible. Aside from the very rare, very far and few between chests that contained gear and weapons, you were getting just some money, maybe a potion or two, and then crafting materials that you had way too many of. I've beaten the game at this point. I've crafted all of the best weapons. I've upgraded a lot of the best weapons. I've gotten all the best gear and all of those things. And I still have hundreds, if not thousands, of crafting materials that I'm never gonna need. There's no reason for me to have this many of these crafting materials. Like, it makes no sense. I get looking for the special ones, sure. There's just no reason to have so many crafting materials that are never needed. And I should have probably mentioned this earlier, but this is something that could have helped out had we had party members we could have equipped things to, using the crafting materials for them. Granted, I don't think all those crafting materials still would have been used up had I given everybody in the game the best stuff, but I digress. The loot was awful. It was boring and unmotivating. Big yawn for the loot. That didn't stop me from combing every square inch of every map to make sure I got every chest, but that was also to confirm my own suspicions that in fact the chests were just crappy. You'd go off the beaten path, you find a little village in the forest that you weren't supposed to go to, at least not yet, and you'd find a chest there, and it would just have a bunch of sharp fangs and some gil in it. Whoop-de freaking do. That being said, a lot of the chests on like in the missable areas during like the straight gauntlet to whatever boss fight you were going to, those often had good stuff in them, like accessories that helped your iconic abilities and stuff like that. And I was just like, these are a lot more missable, and it kind of adds to how crappy the loot in the chests are overall, because these ones are harder to find. Of course, they have the better gear, but these areas like I can't come back to, at least in some instances. You can't go back to these places. So it's like, okay, this is kind of a oversight. But you can't, there's nothing that can really be done about that. There's not even enough really customizability in the game itself to help with that. You only get 3 different pieces of gear, as well as 3 different equipped accessories, and the accessories are also kind of they're a little mid. I'm not gonna lie. Shout out to Mid, the actual character. There's most of the accessories that you get are either going to slightly decrease the time for an ability or increase the damage of an ability. That's really it. Occasionally there's a few that'll, increase health. There was one that I argue is probably the best one that turns your dodge into like a super dodge, and you get a huge attack boost out of it that's equivalent to being in your limit break. And I got that pretty early on. Once I got it, I never unequipped it. About half the game I had experience and ability point buff accessories, and I still have them equipped right now. And then that was it. Everything else was like cooldown shortened here, attack power boosted here. And there were some very basic stat changing ones as well, like increased attack power, defense, and health. And that was it. There's really no cool effects or anything like that, really, aside from the one dodging one that I had mentioned. So those are pretty whack. But it all kind of boils down to the fact that the open world, or the maps, felt very empty. Some of them were quite big and very sprawling, visually beautiful. Oh my god, I took so many screenshots. All the locations were so good looking and so interesting, and it made me want to go explore. But then I was reminded, especially once I got further and further in the game, that like there's no reason to. There's nothing to find over there. I can just see some stuff with my eyes, and then that's about it. That's all the benefit I'm getting out of it. So, whereas the visuals were really great, the content not so much. There's just a bunch of monsters, a lot of empty places that you could find without having any reason to be there until later you'd get a quest or a hunt to then go back there and actually do something. So that was also kind of like weird, and they would keep areas locked off but then unlock them way before you even needed to go there. Again, weird choice. But now let's talk about the world in terms of lore. That was a huge success. This game has so much lore to it. I'd argue that it's probably the biggest in terms of lore and scope of any Final Fantasy, second only to Final Fantasy VII. Probably. It's pushing close to it. There's so much going on, so many kingdoms, so many factions, so many characters, so many like lores, monsters, different lands that you don't even get to go to in this game, because you kind of take place on one continent and it's like neighboring continent, like the coastal region of it. You don't really get to explore the second continent all that much, and it's hard to even call these continents. They're roughly the size of like Australia, it felt like. I keep yawning like crazy because there's just so much that like they so much to explore, so much that they could have done. And they just didn't really do too much. But they did talk about it. They did write about it. There's plenty of places, especially here at the main base. There's Hippocrates. You also have Vivian over here. And you can go talk to them and get a really good sense of the world and like the scope of everything. If you want to know about people, this game has an awesome feature that I feel like should be in like every game nowadays, at least ones with like story. And that's the ability to, in the middle of a cutscene, you basically pause and it'll bring up a glossary of all the relevant subjects and topics that are being talked about at that time. Places, locations, terminologies, just all sorts of things like that. And then you've got Hippocrates and Vivian where you can come and just learn about things. There's all sorts of different topics and everything that you can learn more about. You can sit here and just go through all of these different locations, terms, factions, story points, just so much on that front. And that is awesome. I love that. I spent a lot of time talking to every NPC that I could, with very few exceptions. I try to get all of like the backstory of everyone that I could. Try to learn as much about the world. My first go through, because again, I don't know if I have it in me to do a second, quite frankly. But that being said, I definitely want to shout out anybody that makes a deep dive lore video on this game. You are doing the Lord's work, because I would love to sit there and just take it all in, check out all the things that I missed my first playthrough of the story, because there's just so much. This feature is also really well done, I thought, because it goes through the entire timeline of the game and will determine characters, relations of characters, and their current states with people throughout the entire timeline of the story. Because the story does have a few time skips. There's some things that happen, and you get to see how people grow over time. Identities become revealed, relationships become more known, and there's just so much to it. And I can click on any person here and find out about them. All these little details. You gotta love fucking Torgal. Torgal's the best. And then this is more of a diagram of events that happened. So where people went, what happened when they went there, the path they took. There's a lot of focus on Clive, but you can also go at any point in time and see how there's like a military movement going from, you know, A to B, and you can see like the current like state of a town. Lots and lots of world building in this game. So much, just so much. That is a beautiful thing. I thought that they knocked out of the park. If you want to get immersed in a story, get immersed in a world, this game has got it in spades. Now, the story it told, not just the lore that it built, but the story itself, I loved it. I thought it was incredibly engaging. There were so many questions that just kept you pushing through, getting on to the next mission, going to the next location. It also kind of circles back to how annoying the side quests were, because when they popped up, you're like, yeah, I get to learn a few things about some side characters. This is great. But I really don't want to stop what I'm doing, because I want to go push and do this next main quest. And that was a huge problem for me, because especially before the final mission, you're overloaded with like fucking, I think it took me like 5-6 hours maybe in total to do all of the side content that opened up only right before the very end of the game. And that was just the quest. There's actually still like battle challenges that I completely skipped over. I was saving them for the end. But in like each of the maps, there are these guys, the Hand of Hyperions, which are essentially just combat trials. And those are things that I personally just didn't find the time to do. When I first ran across one, I got sort of far, but ultimately I lost it. And so I was like, I'll come back to this later. and I still have yet to do that. So there is a lot of content in terms of like things to do in that regard. You can just go around killing stuff. You can do the side quests. You can go explore the world. Although there's not a lot to find, still lots of really cool things to see. And then there are the combat trials as well. But the main thing, what's really going to keep you intrigued, keep you going, is that main story. It's an epic story, huge set pieces, arguably the best boss fights in all of gaming. And I say that even taking into account Dark Souls and stuff like that. I'll admit they're on a completely different playing field in terms of like how fun is the boss, because I mean, come on. Like Dark Souls likes in general have the monopoly on probably the best way to go about a boss fight in an action game, and that's by making it incredibly punishing. You have to learn the patterns and then make use of said patterns in order to find openings to attack. This game's sort of similar, but for the most part, it's not as punishing, so it kind of just boiled down to just getting all your moves out and doing as much as you can, exploiting a few weaknesses, but other than that, it's just, you know, hit them until they die. And it's not the worst thing, but where it really did shine were the set pieces and the kaiju fights, because those were fucking spectacular. You're fighting a literal mountain at one point. There's space fights. You're damn near Dragon Ball Z at one moment. It's just all over the place, incredibly visually appealing, a lot of fun to play. Even if you're not a fan of QTEs, it really wasn't so much that as much as it was just hitting prompts to have a cinematic clash, as the game likes to put it. And as, you know, powerless as you felt doing them, they were still incredibly satisfying to do and to pull off. So these are all good things. The scale of which some of the bosses hit, I used to think God of War had that locked down on the biggest, craziest epic boss fights and like Asura's Wrath, but this game really took it up a notch. It really did. And I think it really came down to all of the icon fights. A lot of the fights with just Clive, as they were rewarding and kind of challenging. The kaiju fights are what sold it. The first kaiju fight really set the pace for how epic things are gonna be. The next one really put things into scope. I'm like, okay, things are pretty wild. The third one, you're just losing your mind. Honestly, at that point, I was just like, what is even going on here? This is awesome. So the boss fights, really well done. But summarize with the story, overall, it was really enjoyable. If you stick to the main path and you skip a lot of the side content, you're going to get a lot of really intriguing storytelling pretty quickly, and you're not going to have to worry about spending too much time in between, you know, main chapter and main mission and blah, blah, blah. And if you're completionist, you're going to have a lot of these really weird breaks in the story that, unless you're just into the game a lot on its own, you're gonna kind of fall off a little bit. And that's a problem that I had. I love the game, I was really into it, but I just kept getting taken out of like the pace and like the feel that the main story was giving me, because I had to stop and do all this extra side content. A lot of it was tedious. I didn't want to do it in the first place, but because I am a bit of a completionist, I had to stop what I was doing and go to take care of those. So it was really odd, especially when towards the end I'm like, oh, I have to go fight God now, but first let me go pick some flowers. Okay. But overall the story was really well told, really well done. I enjoyed it a lot, and I thought that the ending, as much as I hate it, it was good. It broke me, it made me very sad, but it was very well told and quite cinematic, let's just say. Especially like the fight at the end. After the fight, you know, things toned down a little bit, of course, but still really well done. And I like the hint at what happens in the future with the post-credit scene as well. So let's break it down. Anybody that's watched my videos before, you know that when I do a My Thoughts video, I like to give it two scores. I like to give it my personal score, and then a score that I think is more of a neutral stance, kind of a generic, objectively, what everybody that doesn't really look too hard into games would probably rate this game as well. And we'll start with my personal score on this is a 9 out of 10. Like I said, I really enjoyed a lot of this game. There was a few things that took me out of it, such as the side quests with the pacing and the tedium of just doing fetch this, kill that, really, really wore me down. And the really lack of any desirable loot was also quite a blow. And then the third thing was the combat system. Whereas the combat itself was good, it wasn't deep enough for me to feel that it was a appropriate replacement for their old school turn-based system. And well, personally, I just prefer turn-based, so I'm a little bit biased when it comes to that. That's just all it boils down to. Had they incorporated some of the things that I mentioned earlier, I think the combat would have been a lot better and probably wouldn't have been a count against it. But since they didn't incorporate a lot of customizable options, gear, spells, you can have iconic abilities, but there's like no Firaga, there's no Blizzaga, Bio, Haste, Doom, none of that. That was definitely a blow. So for me, overall, I still think this is a 9 out of 10 game. It ran perfectly the entire time. I didn't have any issues. Never crashed on me. The graphics were incredible. The combat, albeit shallow, was still fun and engaging. I found the flashy combos and all that stuff to be really satisfying to pull off. The boss fights just so epic. The story that was told was so great, so intriguing. The world that it built was so awesome. I can't wait to deep dive into it. Some future lore content. It was a really pleasant experience, and arguably the best thing to have played as a PS5 exclusive since God of War Ragnarok. With that being said, the next score I'd like to give it is the objective one, the one that I feel would be more representative of people who don't really know the series, who don't really have much of like a bias of any sort going into this. They're just like, I got a PlayStation. What's the hot new game? Oh, Final Fantasy 16? Oh, well, I haven't played 1 through 15, so this will be good. That kind of a person. And for them, I'm also going to give it a 9. I think that it's a very close to being a 10 out of a 10 for the average man, but that side quest tedium and the breaking of pace in the story, I think is going to get the majority of people that are just looking to play it, maybe not do all the content, they just want to get from the beginning to the end, see the story through. And I think that the way the game presents side quests and its extra content will distract them at least a little bit, and that'll probably bring down their overall enjoyment of that story and of the game itself, because they're constantly being forced to stop and do this not so fun thing before they can get back to the really fun stuff. I think otherwise, the combat's going to be great for them. The world is going to look beautiful. The graphics are insane. All of these things are really, really high positives. The fact you don't need to play 1 through 15 to play this, it's its own story. It just happens to be the 16th entry in a long-running series. It's just got a lot going for it, but I think the pacing of the story mixed with the side quest is going to mess with some people, unless they can kind of decipher, okay, I don't need to do the side quests, I can just stick with the main story. Then they might still consider it a 10 out of a 10. But I feel like the way the game sets it up, presents all the side quests and side content, it's going to slow them down a bit, and they're going to get bogged down in all this extra tedious stuff that they might not going to find so enjoyable. And I don't think of these people as like lore hounds such as myself, so for the most part they're probably not going to care too much about what the side quests have to say and tell you in the first place. So I also think that that's going to kind of count against them for the ones that do the side quests, side content. But that's really all I wanted to say. great characters, great story. I had a lot of fun playing the game. I feel like the time it took to make this was well worth it. Although I do feel like personally, I would have preferred a few different things here and there. And I hope that the next time they make a game, and I hope this is an industry-wide thing, not just with Final Fantasy, but next time they make a game, I hope they focus more on the game itself, the content, the gameplay, rather than just giving you like the most crazy graphics and pushing the console to its limit just to process the combat and that kind of a thing. I think if you took a step back, you didn't care so much about the craziest graphics, you just wanted a good game, I think there could have been a lot more done with this game, a lot more added to it that would have really just harkened back to the old days where you just could spend hundreds of hours on a single playthrough. And you really enjoyed it. Added a lot of variability to the gameplay as well. Because as it is, granted you can change the icon powers, it's still kind of like a one-note system. You know, you go through, you have your abilities, the limited amount that there are. I think there's like probably like 20 or 30 different abilities in the game in total, not counting your basic like combo stuff like the power swing and whatnot. And some of them are relatively simplistic. Ironically, the one I found probably to be the best was one of the most early and simplistic ones. That would be the Will-O-Wisp ability. So pro tips right here: as soon as you get it, unlock this and maximize it. Not only can it juggle lower enemies and do damage to them and stun them, but it also will absorb damage coming in, so it can potentially keep you from getting knocked out by a boss, taking any damage really. It can keep your combos going because you're not actually getting interrupted, and it can add a lot of damage to other attacks. When you get up close, they're still going off while you're doing whatever other attack it is you're doing. They just work really well with almost any combat style, and they're kind of broken, like I said, because of the ability to just nullify incoming damage. So I highly recommend using that. Aside from the Will-O-Wisp, use whatever your heart desires, whatever icon ability you want, anything of that, go for it. There's like, let's see, was it 6? There's 7 different icons, each with 4 abilities. So 7 times 4, 28. So yeah, right in the 20-30 range. You're gonna have some stuff to choose from. Some of them are kind of lackluster, like I said. These tops abilities are always stagnant. You can't change them. They're, once you have this icon equipped, those are gonna replace your circle ability. I feel like when you hold down R2, you should be able to have like 4 abilities equipped per icon, not just 2. I don't understand why they did it like that, but maybe so you're not as overpowered, who knows. But ultimately, it was still a lot of fun. And what was there was enjoyable to play with, so we'll give it that. But that's it. Love the game. It was great. If you have a PlayStation, you absolutely need to pick up this game. It's fan-friggin-tastic. Don't let the Xbox shills tell you it's not worth your time. Don't let the old school Final Fantasy purists tell you it's not worth your time, because they're all simply just wrong. Maybe don't pick this up at $60 or $70 off the rip if it's not something you're 100% sure about. However, I highly, highly recommend playing this one. Honestly, I would even call it a must-have as far as a PlayStation 5 exclusive, or just owning PlayStation games in general. It is absolutely enjoyable and worth your time. Is it perfect? Sadly, no. But is it great? Abso-fucking-lutely it is. And that's about it. I really appreciate everybody that came in, checked out the video. I'm trying really hard to put some more content on this channel, so if you haven't already, definitely subscribe, give the video a like, tell me what you thought down in the comments, because I'm really curious to open a dialogue about this. I know this game was quite divisive, especially among the Final Fantasy fan base of itself, but I'm always open to hearing other people's opinions, even if I think you're wrong. I'm not that like corny about it. I love to have a discussion, especially with people that disagree with me, because when they articulate things well, I am completely open and changing my mind on certain things. I'm not a set in stone kind of guy. I like to have a conversation with people that don't see things from the same point of view as me, because that really does open up in different ways how I can personally view something myself. A lot of people like to surround themselves with people that just agree with them and say everything that they say is correct and move on. I'm not necessarily like that. So if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, whatever the case may be, let me know down in the comments. Also, check out me on TikTok, follow me on Twitch. We got content on all of them. I've also got a Twitter that I like to post some pictures on and rant and rave about whatever things are going on in my life, in games, argue with people on it, all those fun things. But yeah, guys, that's it for me on this one. And again, thank you so much. Have a good one. Panda out.